farmers have been trying to do it better every single growing season, every flock, every herd, from the beginning of the first time that anybody cultivated anything.
Secretary Naig, thank you for joining us and hosting us.
Well, sure. I mean, we don't do this kind of thing very often here in my office. So
Yeah.
now I would have loved to have been out in the field somewhere, but hey, we'll be happy to welcome you to the Wallace State Office Building, the home of the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship since the late 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, appreciate you having us. We thought as we start today, we would ask you, obviously, most, if not all of our listeners know who you are, but tell us a little bit about your family farm, maybe what you've been doing for the last couple months. And it took us a while to get in here.
It did, hey, did you know there's a lot going on in agriculture in Iowa in May and April? And so, again, great to have you guys here. And really, this is quite an effort that you're putting together here. And it sounds like you cover a lot of great topics, but so hope we'll add to that today. But so I come from Northwest Iowa, Palo Alto County. Went to school in Emmetsburg, but nobody really knows. The town of Cylinder is actually what our address is up there. But grew up on a farm, still farm with my dad and my uncle today. Though I think I think I'm pretty representative of a lot of folks my age. I'm 47 years old. Grew up in the 1980s farm crisis. Had parents who told my siblings and I, you should do anything but ag.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
It sounds familiar,
Yeah.
I'm sure, to a lot of folks. And so I've always had this hybrid, situation in my career where I've been able to be so fortunate that I couldn't get away from it. Thank goodness I couldn't get away from ag entirely. And I've been able to have one foot in that farm setting and farming with my family. And yet I've always needed to, like a lot of folks, needed to have an off-the-farm job as well. And so for me, that took the form of I've got a great interest in the policy, the things that make agriculture run from a policy standpoint. Politics, obviously, even though I always say I never would have imagined that I'd serve as the Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, that I would have run for election, statewide. Those weren't things I thought I would ever do. So I always say I give terrible career advice. Don't ask me for that, because you could end up doing something like what I do. But anyway, so I've had some policy roles throughout the years, but and then always had that farm experience. And so I've got a family. My wife and I have 3 boys. Our oldest just graduated from high school, so
nice.
that's a new era for us. And our youngest is a 6th grader. So we got a spread there, and boys doing all the things that boys do that keep us really, really busy. But so for me in the spring, it's a really busy time, as it is for everybody. But for me, maybe a little unique in that I'm dealing with wrapping up a legislative session and also trying to get a crop in the ground and bouncing back and forth and doing all those types of things. But it's been we've had a good spring.
I've got a feeling you wear a headset like this and get very little quiet time when you're back on the farm.
It is a blessing, and let's call it what it is, a curse to have that phone and those phones in my case. But thank goodness I'm always connected, and it allows me to do those things. And I think net it's probably a good thing that your Iowa Secretary of Agriculture would be running a planter or out picking up rocks or doing whatever.
Actually
on
knows
equipment,
what's going on in the real world.
Trying to battle weather and all those types of things, while at the same time trying to maybe deal with a legislative issue or something like that. So I'm blessed, and I always say I'm just grateful I get a chance to get up and do this every day.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. We're kind of switching up roles here. Usually Sean kind of opens the show up, and then I give an introduction into the topic. Being as this is your area of expertise, I'll say maybe we'll switch roles. Yeah. And Sean's got this broke down into some pretty cool topics that we're going to cover and have some good conversations with Mike. So Sean, open us up. Tell us how you have this broke down and what we're going to talk about.
I appreciate that. It was funny because right before we started, Andrew had to kind of panic read the questions and make sure he understood the flow, which is normally my job.
That's your job.
It's normally. No, we thought, our hope would be at the end of a conversation with you, our listeners, especially growers and people in this industry, would understand just a few things. So one would be maybe the role we play in influencing ag policy, right? So we have an opportunity to talk to someone who is influential in directing that portion of our policy. thinking about maybe kind of the midterm future of agriculture,
Yeah.
right? Like what things are coming. And then I think for all of us, really kind of understanding, it feels like politically there's a big ebb and flow when we think about sustainability and what does that mean, and what's the role, frankly, of Iowa and our position nationally. And so kind of breaking down into 3 topics, but and then we've got some fun questions to ask you at the end, so we'll kind of
Did
put
I
you on the
agree to
spot.
that?
But
Oh, no,
I don't
that
know.
also-
Yeah, we had somebody allegedly proof all this, so we'll see how that goes.
It all sounds great to me.
Yeah. I think as I think about our role, so Andrew and I both have the role of helping farmers at a granular level, right? Making decisions on their family farm like you have to do. But thinking about ag policy, help our listeners kind of understand what are the key things happening over the next, I guess let's just say next few years, but you can kind of go with whatever is top of mind for you. What are the key things happening, and how do farmers take a proactive approach to participating?
Yeah. Well, first of all, is this realization, good setup, right? Is that we'll go one click higher, which is, do you think policy affects agriculture? Okay, right. There's the right answer, right? Oh my, yes. Yeah. And so what I always try to kind of when I'm communicating to our ag community is to say, so if you're not engaged, that means you're leaving something that's critically important up to somebody else's voice. And so that's maybe the starting premise is we do have a very impactful farm policy in this country and have for many, many decades. So we oftentimes will talk about the Farm Bill, which being the preeminent piece of legislation that you're going to talk about at the federal level. But I mean a whole host of a whole range of things. So okay, if we kind of look into the future, the next few years. I mean, I think unfortunately that Farm Bill discussion is one of those maybe most impactful ones. We should have had a new 5-year Farm Bill 2 years ago. It just the way that the election cycle works and some of the things and party control and of the last Congress, it just didn't. They ran out of runway to get something done. The House got something accomplished. The Senate chose not to take it up, and they ran out of time. So then you kind of start over again, and now we're into this new cycle where we've got a budget reconciliation process that's playing out, and frankly, there's just a traffic jam on the legislative calendar in D.C. So some of the pieces of the Farm Bill get thrown into the reconciliation. Other pieces of the Farm Bill are still out there needing to be done. So Farm Bill, and then I suppose you could talk about what's the prospect for getting a Farm Bill done in sometime else in the future, right?
Yeah.
You're hearing about that more, which is are we witnessing maybe a change in that? I don't know. We can talk about that. I'm formulating a little bit on that, so let's dig into that. But so Farm Bill policy, and that's everything from risk management like crop insurance and commodity programs and conservation and rural development, research, forestry, on nutrition, all those pieces get put into that Farm Bill, and then of course the budget bills that go with it. Trade policy, right? I think trade policy, trade policy I would always identify as that as being something that's important, but I think the way the Trump administration is really, they're trying to shock the system clearly, right? With the tariff and retaliatory tariff and reciprocal tariffs, and yet trying to compel and trying to kind of create the opportunity for new trade agreements. And so I think trade policy is going to be critically important there. Tax policy always affects farms and businesses broadly, generally, but I'm going to argue that that tax policy specifically affects agriculture because farm transitions and those types of things, the capital intensity of agriculture, capital gains, all those pieces. So those are I would kind of identify those as being some of the big traditional ones. And I would say you'd have to add in now probably more so something we're going to need to be thinking about. That's probably nutrition, and you're hearing a lot about Make America Healthy Again and those types of things, and some of that concerns me very much, and some of it is probably pretty good from a health standpoint, especially for kids and chronic diseases and those types of things. So I'm going to add, which is maybe a bit of a new entrance to that list of things that we would talk about, is we should be talking more about nutrition and health as it relates to agriculture, and maybe in ways that we haven't previously. So those would be that's a range of some things that we could talk about. There was a second part of your question, though. I think it was about how to engage, right?
But let me follow up, because you're talking about things that are so critical to what we do. And I guess my question would be, let's say, flip to the other end, and you're the farmer that's maybe still in his planter tractor or finishing up a post application right now, and and that individual wants to be involved.
Yeah.
What
How do
does
you
that
do
look
that?
like? Yeah, what does that look like in a meaningful way? One of the questions we asked for you, and you can kind of answer this now if you want to, would be, what does it look like to be involved, and can you give an example where that involvement has had an impact on policy?
That's a great question. Well, so first of all, and so in my chair, I view it as critically important for me. Look, there's that's the other side of the equation. So I'm going to say policy affects agriculture, and that affects at the federal level and at the state level. Well, then what you'd better have, and people who are policy makers ought to understand that they should be listening to, and they should be out very in touch with what's happening in agriculture and in our rural communities. And so, one, I like to say, and I think Iowa, we've got a great tradition. We call it the full Grassley, going around and visiting all 99 counties. And, and whether it's the governor or myself, my predecessor, the governor's predecessor, our senators, our members of Congress who are visiting their counties multiple times in a year, frankly, we ought to be, as policymakers, seeking out input and go and find and sit down and hold roundtables and visit farms and visit businesses. So that's one direction is, hey, it's coming to you. But I think the other kind of obvious way for folks to get involved is through associations and grower associations, corn growers, soybean association, your farm bureau, pork producers, cattlemen's, et cetera, right? Those are great ways to get plugged in, and those organizations, I think, do a good job of kind of pushing information out to the membership, but also giving people an avenue to engage with policymakers. But you don't have to even be a member of that to have a meaningful conversation with somebody who's an elected official or who votes on something like this. Frankly, they should be listening to you, but you got to weigh in and you got to talk to them, and you got to make the effort to connect. And so I think those are some of the ways that you can get involved.
Thinking about that, I mean, it's as you were describing that, it kind of reminded me of, we have big global corporations that maybe the people at the field level or customer interaction level maybe don't feel like that the heads of the corporation understand what's going on. In this example, I'm reminded of how does your conversations in DC or at the Capitol impact the grower. And I think a good example of how important it is for growers to be involved in some of these conversations is, the impact of the Failure to Warn Act. And how would you have that conversation? I mean, it's one of those things where there are times where maybe DC and people at the Capitol don't understand how important some of this technology is to a grower or the impact that it might have on a grower's farm. How would you have that conversation with the grower that asks, what's your take on that? This is really impacting the potential of me to control or use whatever technology it may be, right? But again, just going back to the importance of getting involved.
Being involved. Look, and you don't. I think sometimes people feel intimidated by that process, as if to say, there's a good example of, well, if I'm not unless I'm a PhD or in something, some field chemistry related to that pesticide or that crop protection tool, or I'm a lawyer and I can understand that I'm not qualified to have a conversation or have an opinion about that.
Yeah.
I mean, and you want to be an informed opinion, so you got to educate yourself and learn and read as much as you can and listen. But I don't want people to feel intimidated about approaching to say, this is my opinion or this is my reality. And I think that's probably, if you just would say, what's the one thing you can do? Just make sure somebody that you've had a chance to say, this is my reality. This is why this matters to me. This is the actual practical impact to my operation or to my business or to my life if this thing changes. That's impactful, and it absolutely matters. By the way, on this topic, I think this is a good example of where you really do have to have kind of an all-of-the-above approach to working on an issue, which is, you know what, you do need to have, though, somebody who can carry the science message to policymakers on a level that they can understand. So we've got lots of regulators here at the state level or federal level, and you got to know the law, you got to know the science, and you got to be able to go articulate that in a way that matters. And so that's where I do say that, hey, it's good to weigh in and share what your practical reality is. But this is where it is really important to have, again, professional industry organizations that can carry those kinds of important messages in the language that folks need to hear it, or in a way that they can then adopt it and use it for the regulatory process. So, I mean, that's where I kind of say on an issue like that, it's an all of the above approach, and yet people also need to understand how it affects folks on the ground and in the end user, and it's all important.
I think of the glyphosate thing, and then I think of some of the stuff going on with the EPA and pesticide use and all these kind of things. I think, to me, one of the challenges, and I'd ask you maybe if you could speak to this from a practical example standpoint. It seems like, so you mentioned the trade associations, right, and the advocacy groups. Oftentimes, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but sometimes it almost feels like a cop-out, right? Like I pay my $30 to.
I wrote my check,
yeah,
so
I
I
wrote
don't
my
have
check,
to now.
right? Yeah, it's like, hey, I've done my part, but the reality is, I wonder sometimes, is that the best way for us to inform you and the other legislators about the importance of some of these things? We had an event at our place, and I'll leave the specifics out, but we invited a really well-informed person that does government advocacy in, just to speak about the reality of what's happening at the state level and the federal level. And I had 60 growers in my shed with their jaws on the floor. I mean, these producers were like, wow, we have significant battles going on. And sometimes I feel like we're just like, Iowa Corn will take care of that, or that's somebody else's job.
Yeah.
So
it's a good point. And here, by the way, here's the other think the other way to think about this, and kind of the concept of having jaws on the ground is, hey, by the way, there are people who are working directly against you.
Correct.
on some of these issues. And they are aggressively working
a lot of times
against
they're more
you.
vocal than the
Correct.
Yeah.
So what I like to kind of say is every argument's getting made on an issue. Who's forcefully making it and who's doing a better job of it? And if you aren't in your space, if you aren't occupying your space, believe you me, your space is going to be taken up by somebody else. And I think that's the point that you want to make is I sometimes, I remember thinking through one time, it was about the death tax and transition of of property or farms, and how, gosh, why can't we just haven't educated folks enough to know that, hey, this we don't want a situation where you got to sell off land in order to pay the taxes. So
Right.
and there's one thing to pass land and there's another thing to pass a farm. And I thought, well, they just don't understand. And then like dawns on me, oh no, they understand all too well. There's just an element that's kind of out there.
Philosophically
Philosophically
agree,
doesn't think that you should be able to do that, to pass something from one generation to the next. They are actively, aggressively working to ensure that it is harder for us to do that. And you say, oh, it's not just because they weren't informed. There is actually people out there that believe that. So I mean, that's a reality. That's a realization that in the political scene and in the policy world, it's important to advocate. But I appreciate what you're saying though about. I mentioned the associations because I think that's an important way to do it. But you're right. If you say, well, that's somebody else's job. Now, the strength of an association or the strength of a group is when the members are actively engaged and doing so collectively and doing so independently as well. And I think that's a good point to drive home.
Mike, I'm curious your thoughts, from someone that's sitting here and thinking about if I had a specific law coming into place, we'll say something that didn't pass or maybe passed, and I'm frustrated about that, whatever it may be. I don't even know if I would know where to go and have that conversation. What would you tell a grower or a producer that's maybe frustrated about some policy, anything that's going on right now? How would they reach out? What would that process even look like?
Yeah, well, here at the state level, it's the good news is you can easily find who your state representatives are, right? And you can go to the legislative website, or you can go to the congressional page. You can find out who represents you, and you should know that. You should know who represents you. How in the world would you ever go about sending an email or picking up the phone or knowing that they were doing a town hall in your area? You got to know who they are. So I'd really encourage folks to do that. You should know. You should be able to recall who your state rep is and who your state senator is and which congressional district you're in. I mean, I think that's critically important because that's the start. Then you're paying attention. You're seeing where they show up in the news, or did they vote on this or that a certain way. Then in terms of ways to engage, again, my philosophy is that they ought to be coming to find you too, and we do that here. But also, hey, send an email. pick up the phone, make a call. You may not talk to your rep or your legislator, but you may talk to one of their staff people, and that's okay too, because you're getting the message in, you're weighing in.
Yep.
And believe me, offices take those things into account. They know, they're tracking. Hey, we're hearing from about 50-50 on this issue, or we're hearing overwhelming one way versus the other. That stuff matters. And so when there's an all call or an action alert or something, and send a note now, do that. Pick up the phone, do that. Or reach out. I love the idea of, hey, we had a bunch of people over to the shop. Boy, there's a lot of policymakers. There's a lot of elected officials that would say, yeah, I'll join you for that. Yeah. I'll come on in. Hey, pull some of your customers together. Let's have a conversation. I'm pretty fortunate. We do that a lot across the state, whether it's a bank or an ag retailer or one of the associations say, we'll put a group together. Would you come speak? Would you come listen? That's what I like to do. What do you think about this? What should we do about that? Those can be really beneficial to me. So there's an example of, hey, you can weigh in on, I don't like that bill. I want, I want this or I want that, or sign this or don't sign that. And then the other is just to say, hey, I'm concerned about this topic. I want you to know about how concerning this topic is to me. There's that kind of education as well.
It seems like, at least the conversations that I have with a lot of our growers, it seems like there's almost this attitude that this stuff is happening to us, not happening as a part of a byproduct of our representatives. And I think that's something that I hope they can hear you say, which is, hey, come get involved. I mean, I think it's super important. We need to talk about the future of agriculture.
By the way, and this is, everybody's got 1,000 things going on, right? But I would encourage folks that, it doesn't take long to shoot a note. Here's the other encouragement that I would give folks is, hey, even though sometimes the thing that might finally urge you on to send that note or reach out is, man, I am mad about that. Okay, that's fine. You can be mad about things. But it's also okay to say, I like that, or that was a good thing, or I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to look at this. It doesn't always have to be done cast in the negative. And in fact, as somebody who's on the receiving end of all sorts of information, it's great sometimes when somebody weighs in and said, we like this, just wanted you to know.
Well, I think that's one of the things. I mean, part of thinking through the opportunity to have a conversation with you is how often we are so reactionary, right? Like we're oftentimes are relatively disengaged until somebody knocks on our door and goes, are you aware of what's about to happen? And then we're like, well, how did this happen? Well, it's been being talked about for years. And I think agriculture in particular, we're a mature group, right? We've been doing this for a minute. It's not, I mean, and I think we get comfortable with knowing that you're fighting our battles for us and you'll call us when you need us, but sometimes we make the call a little bit too late. And so I would encourage our listeners, I know every time I have one of these conversations, I'm encouraged that the person on the other end desires to do it well on behalf of the constituents. I think it's our responsibility to have some energy and be a little bit more front-loaded.
I mean, with very few exceptions, I can't even imagine one. Everybody wants to do a good job. Help them do a good job. Maybe that's the positive spin on try to be have it be a productive conversation. They want to do a good job, help them do a good job, and you can disagree with them. That's fine too.
Your counterparts in our surrounding high-producing states, how do we do, Iowans?
What do you mean?
As far as our Illinois, Nebraska,
ranking
Minnesota.
me, or are you ranking them? Oh, okay.
Us. No, we'll rank you at the end of the podcast.
We're going to get. Whoa, hold on.
We're going to hold up like
you're letting me score myself. I love this conversation.
No, how do we do as constituents, as people that should be informing policy?
I think Iowans do generally a good job. I mean, I think we have. I always tell a piece of advice when I'm talking to somebody who's running for elective office or maybe new in a leadership role in the ag community, and I think there's some who can confirm that I do this. I say, get out and talk to people. They expect to see you. They want to see you. They want to look at you in the eyes and have a conversation. And I think that's a good tradition that we have here. And maybe it's got to do with the Iowa caucuses being a part of it, retail politics, call it what you want to, but not making light of it. Making a point for several of us to go out and do a 99 county tour and be intentional about those things. I mean, I think Iowans engage reasonably well, and I think we're the best. I don't know. I generally just say that. All due respect to our neighbors, I love them all, but hey, we're Iowa, for goodness' sake.
Yeah. It seemed like this last session, the legislative session was on the news a lot.
Yeah.
And it wasn't often about agriculture.
Correct.
And I think for me that kind of set off alarm bells. There's some things that are very catchy to be news headlines, but oftentimes they don't feel like, at least to me, the things that the people in our network should be the most concerned about. But Andrew, let's switch gears.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the future.
Absolutely, Mike. Thinking about the future in obviously agriculture is vital in just humanity, right? Thinking about some topics that may be of importance as we think about the next 1 to 5 years, 10 years. What are some topics going on at the state level and also the federal level that are of importance in the back of your mind? Just things you're thinking about over the next few years.
Yeah. I mean, I think, in that interval, I think we got to be thinking profitability, in ways that we haven't had to. I mean, there's so much pressure on margins, and and are we? Some of that's just flat out. You got to expand markets all over the world. We're more productive every year. We have the rise of Brazil, frankly, coming in as a competitor globally. That's an issue that we got to be thinking about more seriously. What are we doing to promote domestic usage? Biofuels, of course, being one of those key ingredients there, and then what are we doing on the input side of things to try to bring certainty and bring some of those prices, those costs down. So I think profitability is really got to be the main focus here, or at least that things that we do should evolve or revolve around that. I just think that's our reality at this time.
That's a good topic. I mean, thinking about even before some of this political stuff has gone on in the last year, really. I mean, it seems like the grain market's a topic of conversation every year. What would you say to a grower that to give them confidence about what we're doing, whether it's ethanol or even soybean production? What are we doing to ensure that we have a means to sell that without issues, outside of the U.S., but even within the U.S.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done here. I mean, as it relates to biofuels, I sort of put it this way, which is, hey, there's never going to be a time where we say we're done working on that, or we're done advocating for what we need there, because it seems like we make some progress and we think we got a breakthrough. We're almost going to get E15 year round and in a permanent way, and then no, we didn't. And it's just a reminder that these are hard fought gains and you got to stick with it. So what I would say, at least in the state of Iowa, I think we're when I look across the team at the congressional level, certainly. We're very aligned with the governor when it comes to that particular issue around biofuels, and you just got to stay at it. And I am actually reasonably hopeful that if you kind of put this all together, call it an America First policy if you want, call it I think the president calls it energy dominance, energy independence anyway. I mean, those are all things that I think bode well for good inclusion of renewable energy and biofuels as a component of that. So I really do think that that's one of those key areas that you say, I think we'll make progress. I think we'll make some significant progress in the next couple of years, or at least that's my mentality, and I think we should just be hammering away on that. So that's maybe one particular category where I think there's some upside. Sustainable aviation fuel is the other one that you're going to just say there's a lot of policy pieces that have to come together around that. And we need to remember that that's a global market. It's not just something that you control in the United States. And in fact, that's one of the upsides of the sustainable aviation fuel market, is that it's you don't have to worry about blend levels. You don't have to worry about year-round access to E15. It's a drop-in fuel and it's a global marketplace. Yeah. And so, I mean, those are just some examples of that I think we're going to see movement on those topics in particular.
You mentioned Brazil, and I don't know how. That could be. We could go way down.
Oh my gosh! You could do yeah.
You could be the whole afternoon, but I guess as you think about the near term, and you mentioned the economics, that's obviously front and center for everybody. How do we make sure that we continue to be positioned strong in the state of Iowa with that expanding market?
Well, first of all, there has to be a realization of what they're doing. They're not masking it all. I mean, they're bringing more acres on, and they're clearly trying to grow an energy portfolio. They're trying to grow livestock production, and they are our competitor in the world. And so we need to be mindful of that, and just remember that if we exit the stage or if we are out of a market, there's somebody else to supply it. And famously, when you lose market share in some places, it's awfully hard to get it back. So I think that just needs to inform when we look across the. And by the way, we all should want a very diversified trade portfolio. We don't want to be wholly reliant on any one particular place, and that's a worthy goal. And that means that Brazil and us will be trading and competing and supplying various places around the world, and that's our reality. So I just think we need to be mindful of that and playing offense on trade in ways that maybe we haven't been willing to do the last couple of years.
You mentioned the diversification piece. How would you have that conversation? I mean, you look at the I states, we're corn and soybeans, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get outside there, it's a little bit of wheat. What does that look like? What does that conversation look like over the next 1 to even 10 years, 20 years, right? If Brazil continues to increase their, the amount of grain they're producing, that's going to impact the global price of corn and soybean. What's that diversification process look like here in the next few years?
Well, I think it's twofold. I would say, too, that the other thing that's driven value in agriculture, especially in a place like Iowa, it's the value add. It's what are you doing? So you do have we've had a commodity-based agriculture in this state for many decades, right? But if all you were doing was selling corn and soybean at commodity prices, that doesn't make you Iowa. That doesn't make it. It's when you add value. It's the livestock production. It's renewable energy, and it's taking things that didn't have value before, adding value to them, making them, upcycling them. And so I think to continue to build that out and to continue to look at how do we continue to pursue bio-based. I say bio-based anything and everything. I mean everything from ethanol to material fibers, fabrics, those types of things. I mean the sky's the limit, and so I think we got to continue to be focused on that innovation agenda that will both help diversify the output side and more value, but also the innovation side of better inputs, more efficient, optimizing production, driving down costs, those types of things. So I really do think it's an innovation-heavy approach that we have to be looking at. And then diversification, absolutely. There's we sort of went back and looked and said, during the COVID years, the disrupted supply chain was something that a lot of people had never experienced. People, well, you guys are both young, so you'd never experienced going into a grocery store before and saying, well, you didn't have something, or you were limited in the quantities that you could buy. And that, I think that surprised some folks. There was just, so we thought, well, we should shorten the supply chain, shorten the distance between the farm and the fork. And there has been a growing trend of late of that, how do you supply that market? There's a demand. The overwhelming numbers, I mean, you're talking 80+%. We've done some survey work in Iowa that 80+% of Iowans will go out of their way to find a product grown, raised, or made in Iowa. They also said in overwhelming numbers they might be willing to pay a little more for that product. I always use the example of if you're standing at Fairway and you got 80 bottles of barbecue sauce on the shelf, because there are 80 different kinds of barbecue sauce. And you see one that's from Iowa, you're gonna tend to look for that one, and again, you might even be willing to pay a little more for it. And so we do see lots of opportunity for that. Now, what's the barrier to that, you might ask? If we're going to get into more value add at that local level, so that's more dairy processing, that's more fruit and veg processing, we need to have meat lockers, and we've seen a good surge there. So it'd be like, take that meat locker concept and now apply that to growing green beans, carrots, and everything else. And so we do have a gap there that exists in terms of our processing and our distribution logistics. So I do think, now, will that rival the scale and the value of a corn or soybean? We're a long ways from that, but I think there will be a not insignificant. How's that for a double negative, right? It'll be a not an insignificant component of our agriculture, that diversified look, and could create some opportunities for young, beginning, and small farmers, or even, as I've met some folks of late who are part of traditional kind of row crop farm operations, and then they've got this other piece over here that they do, that they sell direct, and you can create some real value there.
Is that trend for traceability and visibility what are we seeing there? because I mean, ultimately, right, the connection is it's granular in the sense that I'd rather buy something from Iowa than somewhere else. But there's also this concept of I want to know the farmer, I want to know the farm.
Yeah.
What do those trends look like?
Yeah, that's a great
It's
question.
totally off script.
Yeah,
right?
no,
Just
and
what you're talking
I was
about.
going to go off script and ask that same question.
Yeah, I love it.
And I don't have a great now. That's something I don't have a lot of numbers on, but for us, that's always been a challenge, right? In a state now back to when we are commodity producers. There are a lot of other places in this country that have had identity preserved for a long time. You know that. And we've got a commodity system so I think we're having to build some of that, but I think there's still a growing interest. Look, normally the trends I'd say is it's local, and then it's what is local? Well, local is whatever you think it is, and whatever you think it is. To me, it's Iowa, right? And I'll even accept kind of the surrounding couple layers of counties as well. The other is kind of natural, right? And I see that as being a real trend, and that can mean a lot of things too. Not so much we still see a strong organic, sector in this state. We're one of the top organic production states, in fact, by acreage. But I see a lot of people talking about integrated pest management, natural as you can, those types of things. And I still see those as being very. Those are still trend lines that I think are building and developing.
That's what I was going to build on. That's where my mind went. We have a very small percentage of the American public that understands and is around farming.
Yeah,
right?
very much so.
And so I'm curious how often your group talks about how do we handle these situations, talking about organic and maybe just traits in general. The whole GMO term. How do you approach that? How do you think about that? How do you see? Because I mean, realistically, I see that problem almost getting worse in the future. Right?
Yeah.
I feel like people are.
Well, we started the show talking about make America healthy and some of the nervousness that we should have. What does that look like?
Well, frankly, what would tell you? Why should you think that trend line shouldn't continue? Because what's driving that? It's your distance from the farm. You get 1, 2, 3, 4 generations removed from actual production agriculture, and now you're really into or your memory of it or your perception of it is something that's not of today. I had this conversation with my dentist one day. I said, I think you're missing an opportunity. I think you need to do artisanal dentistry. Everybody wants to do things like it used to be in ag, and we're a little tongue in cheek, and I'm like, you should go back and do old style dentistry.
Absolutely.
We laughed and said, well, that doesn't sound very appealing, does it?
No Novocaine or anything.
Yeah, no, just here, bite on this piece of
the vice grips,
piece of leather, and and it's like, well, so the point being, right? Well, isn't it interesting that we look at so many other phases of our lives and we say, well, we wouldn't want to go back. We love the innovation, we love the new approach, and it's better for me, and yet in ag, a lot of people have this romanticized vision of what it was, and they're kind of the opposite. And I thought, well, I don't know. I was like, I'm trying to figure out a way to articulate this to people, and I use the dentist experience a lot because people kind of go, yeah, no, that'd be awful.
Yeah,
that's a horrible idea.
That's a good one.
but I do think that and then how do you do that, right? How do you continue to find? And here's the only thing I know about that is that we need more of it, and we're going to have to continue to be creative about it. And each generation will have a different lens that we'll have to try to show ag to them through, which means just because it worked maybe 10 years ago doesn't mean it's going to work 10 years from now. And I think that we need a lot of creativity in that space. And it's little things, but I one of the things that we're really having a lot of fun with, but more importantly than having fun, I think it's effective, is through our Choose Iowa program, which is a branded program for Iowa grown, Iowa made, Iowa raised that we administer at the department. Just an example, we've got a farm store crawl coming up in later in June. Well, this is all about you've got these farm stores that are developing, and a lot of them, in a barn or in a building that's right on the farm. And that's just a little tiny example of something that there will be people that'll have maybe their most meaningful farm experience that day when they go out to go shop. But doggone it, we got to be doing more and more of that in small ways like that, and in very, very intentional ways where we're inviting people to farms and showing them, and doing it through all the media channels that we possibly can. I do think that's a potential threat to us because again,
farm sizes are decreasing or the number of farmers every year. Farm sizes are getting bigger.
It's
the number
the whole,
of farmers are decreasing.
It's the whole victim of your own success type thing. You know, you say they're just and by the way, it hasn't been. I mean, it's been in the lifetime of people that are be listening to this program that has gone from a rather significant percent of the population engaged directly in ag to a very, very small percent. And again, that I don't think that trend is going to stop in its entirety. I think that we probably need. No, we don't probably need. We need to continue to do more there.
It's good to hear that because obviously the population globally continues to increase. We're going to want more protein. Number of farmers are decreasing every year. In that conversation, just I mean, to feed the world, we're going to need all the technology. We're going to have to use all these different methods, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, right? Otherwise, the price of food is going to continue.
The numbers don't add up, do they?
Yeah,
you know, India is a great example. We were in India. Governor led a state trade mission last September. I went along, and you know, it was just interesting. Largest country in the world by population, over 1.5 billion people. They now are surpassed China, and it's like, but you look at what does India need to grow like they want to grow and supply the needs of their population, and then you look at their productivity, and the gap between their productivity and their consumption or what they need is just incredible, and you say. That's just one example, one country, and they're already having that significant gap. Imagine where it goes from here.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's tricky when you talk about this. The efficiency we've created here is it's easy to start to turn around and poke holes in it when you forget what it was like to not have enough, right? And we've done such a great job of implementing technology and our yields and the resiliency of our cropping system, especially through weather systems and all these things, is just literally second to none. And I imagine we'd maybe think a little bit differently about it if we were in a place where we were, you know, on the other end of the spectrum. And so India is a great example. But for the sake of today, and I think this is a really good segue, let's spend, you know, kind of the final part of our show talking about something I know you're very proud of in the state of Iowa, and something I think we'd really like you to weigh in on, which is just kind of the sustainability piece of what we're doing here in the state of Iowa. And obviously that term gets used. I
actually was just thinking to myself, I should ask you to define that.
I was going to ask you to define it for me, but
it's like soil health.
Yeah, I got it.
What's it actually mean?
I'll know it when I see it. Yeah, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Yep.
I went back to my family farm when there were too many people at the table. So I got my start in the early 2000s when we were doing CRP programs, quail buffer restoration, and you know, and then here we sit 20 some years later, and Andrew and I think both have a passion of really mirroring efficiency, so pushing yields, doing what Iowa does best, but doing it in a way where we challenge our growers and partners to think about what's the best way to do this, where we're cognizant of the impact that we're having. So I guess let's start with, why don't you define Iowa sustainability? We're going to go off the script a little bit, but I actually would love to hear your take on that.
Doing it better every time. That's what I honestly think. I've always. I don't know, it kind of dawned on me a few years ago, and I thought, you know, because I probably tried to sort through, like, what have been some of the big sustainability steps, and you try to go back and think about that, and I thought, you know what, in reality, farmers have been trying to do it better every single growing season, every flock, every herd, from the beginning of the first time that anybody cultivated anything, right? You made selections that you hoped would, or you had an expectation, and you couldn't see the numbers and the science behind it. You were making visual,
just look for the biggest ear,
looking for the biggest ear, the best, and then we're gonna and think of that in just incremental. Every single time, I'm going to fix that problem. I'm going to do a little bit better on that, and boom, boom, boom. Throughout the history of agriculture, that has been it's interwoven in the DNA of the whole concept. You don't think, well, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do the same thing. You have to think, or I'm sure there are some who do that, and you shouldn't do that. But I mean, I think the vast majority, from beginning of time, you're trying to figure out how to do it better. And so then you arrive at a point like today, and you say, my goodness, we have so many tools at our fingertips, so much information. And to me, that's one of the great challenges is, okay, guys, you know, you're in this world, right, is how do you take all that information? I think back to getting the first pretty yield map. It had colors, and you go, oh, that's really Gosh, that's neat. Yep, that part of the field. Oh, sure. Okay, 3-ring binder on the shelf.
Right.
Now,
never,
what-
never,
what-
to be,
you know,
never to be seen again.
Where were those? What,
Right.
what do we do with those? And again, that hasn't been that long ago that you're now taking that and you can layer that in with all this other information that we have. But is it actionable? Can you gain insights from that in a way that you say, plant this at this population with this fertility program, with this crop protection program, and layer all those things together and then learn insights every single year. And so, I mean, to me, those are just, and those are things that are improving our sustainability. And they're not things that you even say they're sustainability, but they are, right? Every time you do it better,
So by definition,
by
they are,
definition, and we don't even oftentimes call them that. It's just a productivity gain, and so I think part of that is it is about what do you name it, what do you call it, how do you track it, those types of things. And so I really do believe that. Now, the other piece we think a lot about is just I think we need to be talking more about how do we optimize production, right? It's not just about, but I did have somebody tell me this just this past year, which is, Mike, it's still bushels times price equals revenue. And I said, okay, I get that. It's the whole just muscle your way through and bushel your way through a situation. But, with all the insights that we have, don't you think that our ability to then talk more about optimizing production on a field and knowing that every single, whether you're farming in Palo Alto County where the fields are about as flat as this table, that's not true, there's more variability, or whether you're farming in Fremont County where they're anything but, that you can optimize production on those fields in a way that you say that part of the field can actually do more if you gave it more, and that part over there needs to do less or shouldn't be in at all. And you actually can improve the profitability of that whole piece of ground because you did it with those insights. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of that, of bringing all that information together in a way that I don't know what the interval is, but I always think, what's the thing that takes hold, guidance, right? Systems. You look back and say, what was the adoption curve on that? And now you look and say, I wouldn't even know. What would you do without it now, right?
It's like trying to back up without a backup camera.
Oh my gosh!
Right?
How do you do that even?
Yeah.
But that what are those innovations where you'll go, I don't even know how we did it before we knew about this thing, and how fast that can happen. So those are things that have got me excited.
You'll appreciate this. So one of our listeners and good friend of ours named Steve Henry. You probably know him, but
I know Steve Henry.
we asked Steve. We said, Steve, define sustainability to us, and he said, well, these are my costs.
Yep.
This is my revenue. Anything above this line is sustainable. And it was one of my favorite answers because he's a guy that thinks beautifully about
long
long
view.
term. Yeah,
Famous,
thinks
famous,
beautifully about the long term, but
Mike,
what a great example.
Mike, tell me a little bit about the Mississippi River Gulf of America watershed nutrient task, because I feel like this kind of aligns with sustainability, regenerative ag, the new term that we're using.
And I would also add into that freedom to operate, which we don't really talk about, but I mean, it's the whole, you also want to talk about making sure that you're being proactive in a way that you don't bring on regulation or again, policy that goes the wrong way. Probably that's that other tack on to the first conversation we had, which is what's agriculture doing to be proactive so that we don't necessitate a regulatory reaction to what's happening. And so I think the hypoxia task force really all about driven by the Mississippi River watershed, the basin, and what's the effect of water there at the Gulf, and really talking about trying to with the goal of reducing the nutrient loss from the landscape through that region, and it's really nitrogen and phosphorus focused. Yep. My predecessor, Bill Northey, who was a great man, and God rest his soul, and really had a heart for conservation, and was the first co-chair of that hypoxia task force. So it's all the states throughout the region is one side, and there's a state co-chair, and then there's a federal government co-chair. It's usually the Office of Water at EPA. Yes, EPA and us together, it's something. But it's the federal side and the state side who would come together with to work together on trying to achieve these goals. Even the federal government throughout many administrations have said, this is not something the federal government can do. Even if they wanted to regulate agriculture and even non-ag thing, water throughout the region. They couldn't do it. It's a massive cost and scale, and so they had to. There was a recognition early on. You got to work with states. You got to address the resource concerns in a particular state, and that every state's situation is different. And so that's where over time now we've had every state in the basin has developed their own nutrient reduction strategy. We have one in Iowa. We were the first or right first or second to have a finalized nutrient reduction strategy, and now states are on, moving forward with implementing their plans. And in Iowa, we looked at and said, we don't just want, this isn't just an ag issue. This has to be a point source and non-point issue. This has to deal with wastewater and water treatment and industrial water users, and it has to deal with agriculture, and it's got to deal with the urban landscape and the rural landscape. And so that was a lot of wisdom of those of Northey and President Winterstein. She was then Dean Winterstein, and Chuck Gipp at the DNR. Some of the early folks that worked on this issue said we can't afford to chop this up and look at it in pieces. We have to look at it holistically, and that has served us well. Frankly, it's been a model for other states. So we're really proud of that leadership position, and we take it seriously. So I've continued to be co-chair. After Bill left, I stepped in, and it's something that I take very seriously, the responsibility to do that. We benefit from it, by the way, because we're always learning from other states and sharing and trying to work together.
Yeah. I'm curious, you brought up a good point again, going off script. It's my turn to go off script finally. We have a lot of things. I mean, the entire U.S. looks, Iowa, Illinois, the I states, right, for management practices, just rules and regulations. What are some things that maybe we look at other states for in terms of learning what went right, what went wrong? And then also what's something that other states maybe look at Iowa and kind of learn what we did right, what we did wrong?
Well, I think with Iowa, one thing that I'm really proud of, and we continue to hold to this, which is that we have to be. I have a responsibility to be a good steward of taxpayer resources, right? And so what we have made this commitment all throughout this implementing the strategy, which is we're not going to spend state resources, taxpayer money, on things that that don't have a proven outcome. And so we started something that other states did. Not every state did this. Some are going back and doing it now. Many did follow our lead and do this, which is to have a science assessment done at the beginning. Iowa State University did a literature review, looked at the research, and said, for instance, when you plant a cover crop, you're going to see, on average, a 30% reduction in the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that leaves that acre of ground. Now, of course, you know how this works. There was some higher, some lower, depends on all these different factors, but on average, now that tells me that that's an investment that we can make, because if we put $1 into cost share to help with cover crops, you're going to have an expected return on that. And that's sort of that's the value proposition for the taxpayer, is to say we're only going to do things that work. And we're gonna do a variety of practices, and we created a menu of things that had a corresponding reduction. And I think that that's something that others, even those that they got on with implementing before they had that work done in their own state, and some are going back and doing that now. So I'd say that's one of the key things. That, and the fact that we've had many people say, gosh, you guys all work together at Iowa, and I say, we don't know any other way to do it. I mean, we're sitting down with the DNR, we're sitting with our land grant institution, Iowa State. We're working with all the different parties and stakeholders. I don't know any other way to do it. And then I realized, oops, that's not how it happens everywhere else. And so we're pretty fortunate with that, but that takes leadership to ensure that we do that. I'd say some of the early on, we were definitely inspired by the fact that Indiana was really the cover crop capital of the country, and we thought we want to be like them. And learned a lot from them about how they were doing things. Some of the initial research comes out of there, and we've surpassed them now. That's not to say that's sure we're competitive, but I mean, I would say early on they were they were really out there in front, and we learned a lot on that. So that's just one example, but we're always learning. And the other would be that sometimes there's issues that pop up, and you say, we'd like to be doing more of this kind of work, but there's we've got an issue with the Army Corps of Engineers related to permitting around wanting to build wetlands in this state. And so you can kind of commiserate with other states and work together and try to address those barriers too. So that, I think, just commiserating with colleagues and knowing that we're all part of this overall effort, but also then measuring in a way that says, are we doing something here? It's an interesting scenario in the bigger basin area. really the trend line is really a lot of progress on nitrogen and not as much on phosphorus. I mean, there's a long ways to go there. In Iowa, it's the flip. We've nearly achieved our reduction goals in phosphorus, and we've got a long ways to go on nitrogen. So it's or nitrate. So it's an interesting. We're trying to continue to look at that and how does Iowa and how's this bigger picture look and trying to understand that better.
Yeah.
I appreciate that and appreciate the hard work in it. We've got the opportunity to interview Dr. Castellano with the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative. And when you talk about the collaboration between all the different entities, I think about the work that they're doing and the insights that will give to growers, right? Because ultimately this has to turn into action, which means growers have to have the confidence to do it.
Absolutely. Can I have to give you one?
Absolutely.
That in fact, that tool, right, is. I always described it. My grandma, God rest her soul, she was quite a baker, and but then she kind of became concerned that her oven wasn't reading correctly, so she hung a thermometer inside the oven, and then she wasn't so sure that thermometer was right, so she put a second thermometer, and I said, that is the best way I can think of how you should be thinking of your nitrogen usage.
Right.
Is you ought to hang 3, 4, 5 thermometers. I don't care. Keep refining and keep checking, and because. We got to move past the idea that I'm going to throw a little more on for insurance because you never want to be short.
Yeah.
But how can you gain insights and learn and then do the testing on the ground and say this is a range that you can have confidence in, and that'll only get better as we even plug more information into that model. So hang a couple thermometers in your oven.
It's a great. I mean, it's both a great soundbite, but also great. I mean, great practical advice. And I think that you used the term earlier talking about sustainability and the idea of optimization.
Yeah.
That should be our goal, right? I mean, in any business, that's your goal. And then if we're lucky enough to do it really profitably, we can make some really cool decisions about what to do with that abundance, right? But first, we've got to make sure we're doing it right in a way we can do year over year.
That you get to do it again.
Valuable. That's right.
Yeah. Well,
that's
and that's the other reality is you only get. I mean, you make so many decisions, and then the ships sail, so to speak, right?
Yep.
There's only so many interventions you can make throughout a year, and again, probably something that your average person doesn't always understand if they haven't been around that, and why are you praying for rain like crazy in July, and just that's one of those practical realities. So then you'd better bring risk management tools and insights that can help somebody actually manage that and do it in a way that recognizes that you're only going to get so many times around the sun to do that.
We normally, so our show is called A Penny for Your Thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Normally at the end of our show, I cash in my penny, so I try and get a penny's worth of value out of my co-host. I think today,
I was actually, before you do that, I was gonna interrupt and put you on the spot. And
well, I'm gonna go
flip-flopping.
I'm gonna go the entire other way.
You really are exchanging roles.
I'm just trying to get out of what I know is coming, so I'm gonna put it on you. So we're going to give you, the end of our show today, Secretary Naig, we're going to give you the opportunity to just answer a few questions that we think our listeners will really like the answer to. So we can go spitfire here, but what is one thing you wish all Iowa farmers would either read or listen to?
Oh, well, this podcast obviously is something that
that's a must.
Read or listen to. I really am. I mean, it's because we just talked about it. I really am excited about NFACT and the tool, the insight, the tool, and because it is such a driver of things, and because it's the convergence of this productivity, profitability, and what we need to be doing from a sustainability and a water quality standpoint. I think that's the kind of game-changing piece of technology and approach. That was collaborative, that had lots of stakeholders, and nobody else is doing it. We're ahead in that, and others are going to do it because we're going to share that information, because don't we want everybody to be doing well? But I really do believe that is some cool stuff that's fresh, it's hot off the press. There you go.
And I'll add to that, it's something Andrew and I talk about all the time. This is all philosophy. If someone can't back it up with data, and that's what Dr. Castellano and his team are doing, is they're giving us data to say, here's a set of resources to make informed decisions, which changes it, because then it's not a bunch of guys sitting around a table telling other people what to do. There's actually information behind it.
And it's spread. I love, well, I see that you did a trial, but that was in the other part of the county. So, and I think the point being that, hey, and the idea would be to get information from all across the state so the folks can say, yeah, it actually was done in my county, part of the county.
Yeah.
We could dub this Mike's 2 cents.
I always wanted to do a podcast called Hot Mike, but
That's a good
just,
one.
Just hot takes.
That's a really good
hot
one.
takes from the Secretary of Ag, and nobody on my team thinks that's a very good idea. So
In case
maybe,
the whole agriculture thing doesn't work out, it's like, yeah.
So maybe you guys can give me
There you go.
a
There
way
we go.
to do that.
Mike, what's one thing that keeps you up at night in regards to the future farming?
I think that the one of the great challenges is it's sort of those black swan actually they're not black swans because you can see them coming. Things that there's some real disruptors out there. Animal disease is one of those that high path avian influenza has. I mean, if you look over just the last 3 years, our team, we've done the numbers. We were in a response mode here, as in we had an active case in the state of Iowa or recovering from one for I think it was something like 80% of the year 3 years ago, 70% of the year 2 years ago, and 60% of the year last year. So on average, we're spending 70% of our time, knock on wood, we haven't this year, in some sort of a disease response.
Wow.
For an animal disease response.
That's about triple what I would have even guessed.
Yeah. So I think that's our reality here. It's our job. We're I hate to say this, we're good at it because we've got a lot of practice on it. Shame on us if we're not good at it. But meaning that's just the known things that we have. African swine fever would be one of those. Very, very impactful. I mean, you can put a very high dollar amount. Iowa State's done some work on that of what it could mean to the broader protein complex, but also just what it could mean for corn and soybean prices. It's a huge economic impact. So we need to be, one, doing whatever we can to prevent it from ever getting here, and two would be we must have the most effective response that we can possibly muster. In fact, we're exercising nearly daily right now some effort around trying to be better at responding, and that's one of those that just in my experience, even just as I've been secretary, the amount of time that we've spent in response mode does then compel us to be more prepared. Like it's the inspiration you need if you needed it to say, well, we gotta get ahead.
That's a really good call out. I think it's all easy. We've been hearing about some of this stuff on the news for a while. It's pretty easy for someone that maybe doesn't raise those animals or produce the crop to just think about what's the impact. It's not good, obviously, but what's the impact? I think some of those numbers, man, that's pretty astonishing.
Well,
and thinking about the impact it would have on our food prices to everything, it's huge.
Well, you saw we saw egg prices spike this year, and it was a result of that. So then you just kind of play that out across our egg sector, and that's one that's always that's on my mind. But we're doing. I would say this, that something I'm actually quite proud of is we've never been better prepared than we are today, but that's not good enough. We're going to be better tomorrow, and then we're going to be better the day after that. And it's one of those things that you'll never say, there, we're done. Yeah. It'll always be such that you should be trying to think about how can you just do it a little bit better.
Yeah. Mike, as we wrap up, Hot Mike / Mike's 2 cents, what gives you hope or optimism for the future of farming?
Well, I think there's just way too much history that shows us that agriculture is built of incredibly resilient people to not be excited about the future. And I imagine that they were wringing their hands and they were nervous at times, and we know that it was hard in the 80s, and you can go before that, and the Depression, and it just throughout time. The one thing you know about ag is that it's cyclical. The ag economy is cyclical. There are down cycles. And imagine what they were all going through, and we're concerned about things. We may be wringing our hands about things. We may be worried about some things. Profitability is not where we want it to be. We can see some trend lines where things don't get better, right? We don't want to go there. But I can see significantly more trend lines where we can do better, where we can address some of these concerns, where the innovation agenda can continue to deliver tools that will allow us to continue to be productive and optimize and sustainable and all those things, all those buzzwords that you want to use. But there's just way too much evidence that would say that we have endured through some really challenging times to not say we're going to keep doing that. Maybe the flip side would be to say what we do in ag's never going to go out of style. I used an example of the Kodak Film Company was one of the largest companies in the world, certainly in the United States. And in a matter of a dozen years or so, it went from the peak to out of business. Mm-hmm. Do we take fewer pictures today? No, I think we take multiples more pictures. We do it in a completely different way. Film is not what you're doing. So that's one of the other analogies I can think of is we take more pictures today than ever before. The need for agriculture will never, it'll always be greater. We know that. The trend line tells us that. How we take that picture, how we deliver on that will be different. And we need to be about the business of making sure we're addressing the actual things that matter that'll allow us to continue to be successful. And so shame on us if we don't do that, because then it's like, well, if the people that came before us weren't about doing their work, where would we be today? So we'd better be about doing our work, and you try to leave something better than you found it, I think is the mantra that we ought to have. But I can't help but be optimistic about that. It's so I think it's just built into ag people. We can complain about things, don't get me wrong, but we can sometimes be pessimistic. But look at the trend lines. What we do is the most important economic activity in the world, and it's going to continue to be.
What a great way to end.
I was going to say we end our show with with intentional gratitude. I think it's important. Andrew and I have just really appreciated our opportunity to do this. We never would have thought we'd have had an audience of people that cared enough to listen to us, and it's primarily because we have great guests. Thank you. We're our listeners can't see this, but your staff is through the glass wall on the other side of this, and just want to say thank you to you and your staff and the people working hard down here to continue to make agriculture great and resilient. And thank you for taking time to spend with us today.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. We need to do this again sometime.
Love it.
Sounds good.
Love it.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike.